Let me confess something. Once, when I was helping someone craft a 7 traits list, I whispered to myself, am I now reduced to bullet points like a BuzzFeed quiz? But here's the thing about what turns women on. It's never just a checklist. It's the way traits fall into the story we tell ourselves. The angle of a smile that lights up vulnerability in it. The unspoken confidence that follows someone into a room. So I thought, let's talk about 7 physical traits that turn women on and one that doesn't. At least not in the way you might think. It's tempting to believe that attraction is a formula, a tidy equation of physical traits that will unlock desire every time. But if that were true, we wouldn't spend so much of our lives wondering why someone made our pulse quicken in one instant and left you a sun muffed in another. It's not the trait in isolation, it's the story attached to it. And stories, as it turns out, always speak louder than traits. Think about the way a smile works. A smile on paper is just the upward curve of muscles in the face. That's the trait. But the smile that made you linger, the one that made you feel chosen in a room full of distractions, that smile told you something. Maybe it told you this person saw you, not just anyone. Or it told you that you were amused, but in a way that included you in the joke instead of excluding you. The trait alone doesn't carry power. It's the story behind it, the warmth, the intimacy, the subtle invitation that gives it meaning. I once spoke with someone who insisted that broad shoulders were the #1 physical trait that drew women in. It's evolution, he said, with the confidence of someone who had read exactly one article on the subject. And yet, in the same breath, he admitted that he'd been passed over by women in favor of men who weren't nearly as built as he was. Why? Because broad shoulders can mean protection, but they can also mean rigidity. They can suggest strength, or they can suggest someone carrying the weight of his own insecurities. The same shoulders that feel like shelter in one story can feel like a wall in another. And the women who walked past him were rejecting his body. They were rejecting the story it seemed to tell. When we talk about eyes, we often romanticize them as windows to the soul. But what women find magnetic isn't why women notice subtle traits, simply the color, shape, or symmetry of eyes. It's what those eyes communicate in real time. A pair of eyes that dart around the room nervously tells one story. Eyes that linger too, long without warmth, tell another. But eyes that lock on with curiosity, eyes that say, I want to know you, not just look at you. That story is intoxicating. It's the story of attention, of presence, of hunger, not just for a body, but for a person. And that's the story that makes someone memorable long after the glance has ended. The same goes for posture. Good posture technically is a physical trait, but posture without context is meaningless. A man standing tall and straight can look confident in one situation, and in another, he looks like he's trying too hard, bracing himself against the possibility of rejection. What women read isn't the angle of this being. It's the story the body is telling. Does this posture say, I'm open, I'm here, I'm steady? Or does it say, I've been taught that if I hold myself this way, you'll want me? Those are 2 very different stories, and embody hasn't changed at all. Even something as seemingly shallow as a laugh carries weight. If attraction were only about sound, then every booming, polished laugh would pull us in. But the law that draws someone closer is the unguarded one, the one that spills out before the person has time to edit themselves. That laugh tells the story of comfort, of ease, of being safe enough to let go of control. A laugh like that is an invitation. You can be yourself here because I already am. And if you've ever felt your own walls lower just because someone laughed with you in that way, then you already understand the point. The story is stronger than the sound, and here's the paradox. The trait that doesn't work, the one that so many chase, is perfection. Perfection is supposed to be the trump card. Symmetry, polish, everything in its rightful place. But perfection erases the story dot. It smooths over the cracks that make someone relatable. It takes away the curiosity because there's nothing tender about, no edge to get caught on. Perfection tells a story too, but it's a lonely one. It says, I am safe behind this wall. I am untouchable, and untouchable is the opposite of magnetic. Women aren't turned on by mannequins. They're turned on by people. People who reveal, even in subtle ways, that there's a living, breathing story unfolding beneath the surface. It's worth asking yourself when you imagine the traits that attract others. Are you remembering them as they looked in a trait number one that sparks interest or as they were experienced in a moment? Because the truth is, it's the moment that lingers. The way someone's hand brushed against yours when they didn't mean to. And the warmth stayed longer than it should have. The way a voice softened when speaking to you as if it recognized something fragile and wanted to protect it. The way someone's laughter made your own chest loosen as though they'd opened a door for you. You didn't fall for traits. You fall for the way those traits made you feel inside a story that was yours and theirs at once. This is why attraction feels unpredictable, even chaotic. Why? You can find yourself captivated by someone who doesn't fit your usual type. Because what seduces you isn't the checklist, it's the narrative. The man who isn't particularly tall, but who makes you feel taller just standing next to him. The one whose features aren't conventional, but who uses them to express such humor or kindness that they become beautiful. The trait on its own never had that power. The story built around it did. And maybe this is also we get it wrong so often. Why we chase traits in ourselves and others as if sculpting them will guarantee desire. Why we obsess over gym memberships and wardrobe choices and voice training without asking what story we're actually living with all of it. Because when women turn away, it's rarely from the lack of a perfect body. It's from the absence of a compelling narrative. And when they lean in, it's not because you checked off all the boxes. It's because you made them feel like they'd stepped into a story worth staying in. So the real question isn't what traits turn women on. The real question is, what story are your traits telling? Do your eyes tell the story of distraction or curiosity? Does your body tell the story of rigidity or presence? Does your smile tell the story of control or of being moved? Are you trying so hard to seem perfect that you've edited out the very story that makes you attractive? When you stop focusing on traits as trophies and start thinking about them as storytellers, you'll shift the way you show up. Suddenly, your smile isn't about symmetry, it's about generosity. Your posture isn't about dominance, it's about availability. Your laugh isn't about volume, it's about honesty. Even your imperfections begin to serve you because they tell the story of humanity. And humanity is what women crave far more than flawlessness. At the end of the day, people aren't drawn to traits. They're drawn to the way traits make them feel. They're drawn to the promise of intimacy, of connection, of being seen and wanted for while they're beneath the surface. The traits are just the language. The story is the conversation. And if you can learn to tell the right story, not with words, but with presence, you'll realize trait number 2, women can't resist, that the list of traits is far shorter than you thought. What women want isn't perfection. It's a story they can believe in, a story they can enter, a story where desire doesn't feel rehearsed, but alive. And if you want to know what really turns someone on, here it is. Not the muscles, not the jawline, not even the smile. It's the story that those things whisper. In the quiet moments, the ones you didn't script, the ones you couldn't fake. Because when the lights fade and the checklists disappear, what remains, what keeps someone leaning closer instead of pulling away, isn't the trait itself. It's the story that told them, this right here is real. We spend so much of our lives trying to edit ourselves into something more palatable, something tidier, shinier, easier to digest. We cut out the messy parts, the clumsy emotions, the awkward pauses because we're convinced they'll make people turn away. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if what draws people closer is not the curated version of us, but the human one? The one who sometimes fumbles, sometimes cracks, sometimes admits to not knowing. Because the truth is, we don't fall in love with perfection. We fall in love with the places where someone's humanity shows through, even if that humanity looks a little messy, especially then. I think about the people who have stayed in my memory long after they've left my life. They weren't necessarily the ones who had everything under control. They weren't the ones who said all the right things at the right times with the right expressions. They were the ones who let your guard down for just a moment. The ones who laughed too loudly at the wrong time, or admitted they were nervous, or told me something about themselves they weren't proud of. That's what stuck, not the polished version, but the human one. And isn't it telling that the moments we remember most vividly are often the imperfect ones? There was a man once who showed up on a first date looking like he had stepped out of a catalog. Perfectly tailored jacket, shoes so clean they reflected the light, hair combed into submission. He sat across from me, smiling politely, answering questions like he had memorized a script, and yet I couldn't feel him. It was like talking to a mannequin. Then, halfway through the evening, he reached for his drink, misjudged the edge of feedable, and spilled water all over himself. For a split second, the performance shattered. He laughed at himself, really laughed, the kind of laugh you can't stage. And in that moment, he was more attractive than he had been the entire night, because the spill wasn't just an accident. It was an invitation. It said, "Here I am, human and clumsy, not pretending otherwise." And I realized how much more magnetic that was than the polished facade. That's the irony we don't talk about now. The very flaws we try to cover up are often the same ones that make yours relatable. We think we need to present ourselves as flawless to be desirable, but it's the cracks that let people in. When someone admits they're scared, well and in. When they blush, we notice. When their voice wavers, we believe them more. That's what creates intimacy, the sense that you're seeing something real, something unedited. And that's why messy humanity is so irresistible, because it makes us feel less alone. In our own thus. We live in a world trait number 3 that builds stereotypes with control. Control your body, control your words, control your image. We filter photos, rehearse conversions, present curated versions of ourselves on social media. But here's what happens. When everything is controlled, it becomes sterile, safe, but empty. You can admire it, but you can connect to it. And connection, not admiration, is what we're really hungry for. We want to feel close to someone, not just impressed by them. We want to feel like we've touched the part of them that isn't for everyone else, the part that isn't rehearsed. I think about a patient I once had who was convinced that if he could just sculpt his body to look a certain way, women would want him. He spent hours in the gym counting calories, perfecting every angle. But when he finally went on dates, he found that the attraction didn't last out. Women admired him. Yes, but admiration is different from desire. Admiration keeps you at a distance. Desire pulls you in. What he didn't realize was that his real magnetism wasn't in the hours he spent sculpting his body, but in the rare moments when he forgot to perform. When it told a story about failing a college exam and how his mom made him soup, or when he laughed so hard at his own joke of that he snorted, were the moments women remembered, not the abs. The abs are just decoration. The messy humanity was the connection. And maybe this is why perfection often backfires. Perfection looks good from far away, but up close it can feel cold. People start to wonder if you never stumble, if you never show weakness, where is the door through which I can enter? How do I belong with you if you've erased all the places I might recognize myself. The truth is, the mess isn't what pushes people away. It's what makes them feel safe to stay. There's a certain kind of intimacy that comes only when someone shows you their unedited self. Not their Instagram self, not their interview self, but their real messy self. The self that doesn't have all the answers. The self that sometimes feels too much or says the wrong thing or admits to wanting more than they should. That is self that people fall for. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And in a world where so much feels curated and artificial, realness feels like oxygen. So why are we so afraid to show it? Why do we keep sanding down our edges, trying to become smoother, more embellished, less messy? Maybe because we've been taught that vulnerability is weakness, that showing cracks will make people run, but the opposite is true. Vulnerability is the glue of human connection. It's the moment when someone says, "Here I am, imperfect, hoping you'll stay anyway." And when the other person does stay, that's when love begins. Not love for the performance, but love for the person beneath it. I remember once sitting with a friend who had just gone through a breakup. She kept saying, maybe if I'd been more put together, he wouldn't have left. Maybe if I'd been prettier or calmer or less emotional. And I told her what I wish someone had told me years ago. The person who leaves when you show your messy humanity is not the person who is meant to stay. Because the right person trait number 4, she finds magnetic descent want your curated perfection. They want the unpolished you. The one who cries at movies. The one who gets nervous before a big conversation. The one who sometimes eats cereal for dinner. They want the version of you that feels alive, not the version of you that feels edited. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop hiding your messy humanity, you actually become more magnetic. Because suddenly people feel like they can breathe around you. They don't have to perform either. They don't have to keep up the act. They can let their guard down too. And when two people let their guards down together, that's where intimacy flourishes. That's where attraction becomes more than fleeting. That's where it turns into something real. So maybe the invitation is to get rid of your mess, but to embrace it, to see it not as something to hide, but as something to share. To understand that the moments you spill water on yourself, or admit you're scared, or laugh so hard you snort, those are really moments people remember. Those are the moments that connect. Those are the moments that make someone lean closer instead of pulling away. Because in the end, what draws us to each other isn't the illusion of perfection. It's their cognition of humanity. It's the relief of realizing that someone else is as gloriously messy as we are. And if we can stop trying to be flawless and start trying to be human, we might discover that the very thing we thought made us unlovable is the thing that makes us unforgettable. We all have a story we tell ourselves about who we are, about what we've been through, about why things turned out the way they did. And sometimes that story feels so ingrained that we don't even realize it's a story. It just feels like truth. But here's the catch. The stories we tell aren't always accurate. They're interpretations. They're stitched together from memory, from emotion, from fear, from longing. And often, without even realizing it, we romanticize them. We clean them up, exaggerate certain parts, downplay others. We tell them in a way that makes us look better, or sometimes in a way that makes us look worse, but still keeps us safe in the version we've chosen. The problem is when you romanticize your story, you stop seeing what's actually in front of you. You keep living inside a narrative that might not serve you anymore. It's tempting to make our stories more beautiful than they really were. To talk about the heartbreak that changed us forever instead of admitting that we clung to someone longer than wash healthy. To describe an ex as the love of our life instead of acknowledging that we ignored all the signs that they weren't showing up for us. Romanticizing can make us feel like we've lived something cinematic, something that gives meaning to our pain. But if we're not careful, it can trap us in nostalgia or fantasy, keeping us stuck in a loop we can't get out of. I think of a woman I knew who would always speak about her first love as if he were some epic figure in her life. She described him with words you'd expect to hear in a novel. His mysterious eyes, his quiet presence, the way he made her feel alive. Every new relationship she entered was measured against this idealized image of him. And unsurprisingly, every new relationship came up short. But here's what she left trait number 5 that makes you stand out of the story. He didn't actually treat her very well. He was distant, unreliable, sometimes cruel. But none of that made it into the narrative she told herself. She only remembered the butterflies, the passion, the sense of being consumed, and because she romanticized him, she couldn't move forward. She wasn't in love with him anymore. She was in love with the story she had created about him. That's the danger of romanticizing. We mistake the story for the reality. We forget the sharp edges, the disappointments, the moments of silence that hurt more than words. We hold on to the highlight reel and ignore the full film. And then we wonder why we feel unfulfilled in the present, because the present can never compete with the myth. Editing your narrative doesn't mean rooting history in a way that denies what happened. It means looking at it honestly, asking what really took place here. What did I feel and why? What parts of the story am I repeating to protect myself from? Something I don't want to admit. When we edit our narratives honestly, we make room for growth. We stop holding ourselves hostage to the past, and we start understanding ourselves in a fuller, truer way. Take the man who insists every breakup he's ever had was because of women he dated just weren't ready or were afraid of commitment. That's his story, and he clings to it because it keeps him safe from facing his own role. If he romanticizes the story of himself as the steady, ready partner who was always left behind, he doesn't have to confront the fact that maybe he wasn't as emotionally available as he thought. Maybe he pushed them away without realizing it. Maybe he didn't really know what intimacy required, but as long as he romanticizes his narrative, he can avoid looking at that. And as long as he avoids looking at that, he can't change. We do this in small ways too. Think about how people talk about their childhoods. Some will say it was perfect. My parents gave me everything. But if you listen closely, sometimes that perfect childhood was one where feelings weren't talked about or where achievement was valued more than presence. On the flip side, others will say, my childhood was terrible. Nothing good came out of it. But if you press further, there were likely moments of love, resilience, or connection that they're erasing because the larger narrative of pain feels easier to hold on to. Romanticizing doesn't always mean making something sound better. It can also mean painting it as worse, because that simplified story feels more manageable. But either way, it robs us of the complexity of the truth. Editing your narrative is about complexity. It's about allowing more than one thing to be true at the same time. Yes, maybe your ex made you feel alive in a way no one else had, but maybe they also made you feel small. Yes, maybe your childhood gave you stability, but maybe it also taught you to suppress your emotions. Both can exist. And when you stop romanticizing, you can start holding that complexity with honesty. That's when healing happens. And here's the surprising part. When you edit your narrative honestly, you also change what you're attracted to. Because if your story is, I once had this epic love and everything else will pale in comparison, you'll always be disappointed by real imperfect relationships. But if your story is, I once got swept up in trait number 6, she's secretly crevice intensity that disguised itself as love, and I stayed too long because I didn't know better. Then you free yourself, you make room for something healthier, something real. Something that isn't about butterflies and chaos, but about steadiness and intimacy, romanticizing keeps us stuck in longing. Editing gives us clarity, and clarity, while less glamorous, is what sets us free. It doesn't mean the story becomes dull. It means it becomes real. And real is what allows us to actually connect both with ourselves and with other people. I remember once hearing someone say that the most attractive people aren't the ones who have the most dramatic stories, but the ones who have the most honest ones, the ones who can say, here's what I've been through, here's how I mess it up, here's what I've learned. There's no romantic sheen, no attempt to make themselves the hero or the victim, just honesty. And then honesty draws people in because it feels trustworthy. It feels human. It feels like a story you want to be part of instead of a fantasy that will never include you. So if you find yourself clinging to a narrative that sounds too much like a movie script, pause. Ask yourself what's missing. Ask yourself what you're not saying out loud. Ask yourself what parts you've polished so much that they no longer resemble the truth. Because the story you live in shapes the choices you'll make. And if you're living in a romanticized story, you'll keep chasing things that aren't real. Editing. Your narrative is a practice of courage. It means being willing to see yourself not as the perfect protagonist, but as a flawed, evolving human being. It means being willing to admit that maybe fellow you thought was once in a lifetime wasn't actually love at all. It means being willing to acknowledge your own part in the patterns you repeat. And it means letting go of the fantasy in order to step into something better. We all want our stories to be beautiful, but maybe the most beautiful stories aren't the ones we romanticize. Maybe they're the ones we tell honestly with all the mess and contradiction intact. Maybe the beauty is in the realness, not the gloss. Because when you tell the truth about your story, you give yourself permission to write a new one. Not one that's perfect, but one that's alive. And that in the end is the only story worth living. We're living in a world that makes it so easy to choose an extreme or the other. To be sharp and incisive but cold, or to beamlessly compassionate but vague. One voice says, be tough. Be logical, strip away the feelings, get to the bottom line. The other says, be kind, be understanding. Wrap everything in warmth so no one ever feels uncomfortable. But real human connection doesn't happen in the extremes. It happens in the middle ground where insight and warmth meet each other. Where truth doesn't land like a weapon but like a gift. Where compassion doesn't mean avoidance, but a willingness to stay present while looking at something hard. That balance is tricky and it doesn't come naturally. Most of us lean in one direction. Maybe I've noticed you're the person who tells it like it is, who prides yourself on being honest, no sugarcoating. You'll think you're doing people a favor by giving them the raw truth. And yes, truth matters. But if you deliver truth trait number 7, that seals attraction. Without warmth, it often gets lost. People feel attacked instead of helped, exposed instead of seen. The insight might be correct, but it doesn't land because it doesn't feel safe, or maybe lean the other way. You're the comforter, the soother, the one who always makes people feel better. You listen, you nod. You say the right, reassuring words. But if you offer only warmth without insight, the people you love stay stuck. You validate them so much that they never see where they might be hurting themselves or how they could grow. They feel cared for but not challenged, safe but not transformed. The magic happens when you bring the two together. When you can look someone in the eye and tell them something true, maybe even something hard to hear, but do it in a way that's infused with care. That combination is what makes people lean in instead of shutting down. That's what makes them trust you, because deep down, we don't just want to be comforted, and we don't just want to be corrected. We want to be understood. And understanding requires both truth and tenderness. I think about conversations I've had where the most healing thing wasn't the advice, but the way it was delivered. Someone once told me, "You've been holding on to this relationship. It's the only thing standing between you and loneliness." But maybe it's actually the thing keeping you lonely. It was direct, even blunt. But the person said it with such gentleness, with such evident care, that I didn't feel judged. I felt seen. That's the balance we're talking about. The ability to hold up a mirror without making someone feel small. It's easy to get this wrong. Think of the friend who always tells you the brutal truth, but does it with a smirk or with impatience. You stop going to them, even if they're smart, because you feel more criticized than supported. Or the friend who always makes you feel good, who assures you that everything you're doing is fine, but secretly, know they're not telling you the whole story. You stop trusting their words, even if they're kind, because it feels like they're protecting you from reality. Both extremes fall short. Balance means being able to sit with complexity, to say, "I see your pain, and it makes sense that you feel it, and I also see the ways you might be adding to it, and I want to help you see that too." That kind of message doesn't simplify or cigar coat, but it also doesn't condemn. It acknowledges the fullness of a person's experience, their suffering and their agency, their vulnerability and their strength. In relationships, this balance is what allows intimacy to deepen. Imagine telling your partner, "I love how much you care about me." But sometimes the way you show it feels controlling. Without warmth, that sentence becomes an accusation. Without insight, it becomes avoidance. I know. You're just trying your best. It's fine. But with both, it becomes an opening for closeness. I know your intention comes from love, and that's why I appreciate it. And at the same time, I want to share how it feels on my side so we can both feel freer. That's not an attack, that's an invitation. We sometimes forget that warmth itself can sharpen insight. When people feel safe, they're more willing to look at themselves honestly. A child who knows they're loved will accept correction more easily. The one physical trait that turns her off than one who feels only criticized. An employee who feels respected will hear feedback more openly than one who feels disposable. And in our most personal relationships, when someone knows we're on their side, they can face truths they might otherwise avoid. Warmth is not the opposite of insight. It's what makes insight possible, but the reverse is true too. Insight gives warmth its credibility. If all you offer is comfort, eventually it starts to sound hollow. Imagine someone always telling you, "You're amazing, don't change a thing." At first it feels good, but over time it rings false because deep down you know you're not perfect. There are ways you're getting in your own way. And the lack of insight starts to feel like distance, like they're not willing to truly see you. Warmth without truth becomes flattery, and flattery doesn't build trust, it builds walls. The people who move us most, the ones we return to, are the ones who hold both. The friend who listens deeply, lets you cry, doesn't minimize your feelings, and then gently nudges you toward a new perspective you hadn't considered. The mentor who tells you you're capable, who believes in you, and then points out where you might be sabotaging yourself. The partner who adores you, accepts your flaws, and still challenges you to be better. These are the people we let in. These are the people we trust. And this isn't just about what we give to others. It's about what we allow ourselves to. Many of us err on one side with ourselves. We're either our harshest critic or our biggest enabler. We either cut ourselves down with relentless analysis or we sue ourselves with endless excuses. What we need is this imbalance. The voice inside us that says, "I know you're hurting and it makes sense, but I also know you can do better. And here's how." Self-compassion isn't just telling ourselves it's okay. It's telling ourselves the truth in a kind way. Balance doesn't mean splitting things evenly. It doesn't mean 50% truth and 50% comfort. It means knowing in each moment which is needed more and then weaving them together. Sometimes someone needs more softness before they can hear anything else. Sometimes they need a sharper truth delivered quickly before they drift further into denial, but always both need to be present even if one leads the way. When we lean only on insight, we risk cutting people down. When we lean only on warmth, we risk keeping them small. But when we hold both, we give people the gift of being fully seen. And that's what we all want, isn't it? Not to be coddled, not to be scolded, but to be recognized in our entirety. To have someone say, I see your pain and your potential. I see your fear and your courage. I see you as you are, and I believe in what you can be. That kind of seeing changes people. It softens them and strengthens them at the same time. It makes them feel less alone, but also more capable. It allows them to grow without feeling like they have to erase who they already are. And it's contagious when you've been seen that way. You want to see others that way too. So maybe the work is to practice this balance in small ways, to notice when you're leaning too far into harsh truth without kindness or too far into comfort without challenge. To ask yourself, how can I say this in a way that's both honest and caring? How can I show love without avoiding truth? How to embody confidence naturally? Can I share truth without withholding love? Because at the end of the day, people don't need us to be perfect. They didn't need us to have all the answers. They just need us to bring both parts of ourselves. The sharpness that sees clearly and the warmth that holds gently. When those two meet, we don't just give advice, we give connection. We don't just offer correction, we offer healing. We don't just speak, we change lives. And maybe that's the whole point, not to choose between insight and warmth, but to weave them together so tightly that they become inseparable. To let people feel both held and challenged, both accepted and invited to grow. To bring the kind of presence that makes others feel, I am safe here and I'm seen here. Because in the end, that's what makes us stay. Not the cleverness of the insight alone, and not the comfort of the warmth alone, but the alchemy of both together in balance. So here's what truly turns women on. Not a tall, dark, perfect statue. It's the person behind that curious, kind, messy, in conversation, in laughter, in presence. So next time someone asks what turns women on, you didn't need a list on your phone. You just need to show up. Not perfect, but real. And maybe that's more than most oafs realize we deserve.